It started with the kind of mistake you only notice when it's too late to stop. I'd just pulled into the driveway after a long Monday, the kind that drains you through the soles of your shoes. My hands still smelled like motor oil from the lunchtime favor I did for a friend, and all I wanted was a microwaved burrito, a glass of something stronger than soda, and the couch. But something wasn't right. My front gate was closed. I never closed it. Not once. It stuck in the heat, and I preferred the open look anyway. But there it was, latched tight with a shiny new padlock hanging from the hinge like a sneer. I frowned and got out of the truck. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the house. Nothing else seemed out of place. The porch light was off, the blinds drawn, the grass a little long, but nothing outrageous. Then I saw the orange sheet taped to my door. Bold letters, black marker, block capitals, like someone wanted to scream. Notice: property in violation. Access temporarily suspended per Section 14C. HOA compliance underway. I blinked. Then I tried my key. It didn't fit. My hand trembled slightly as I turned it again. The lock was clean, new, replaced. The door I'd walked through every day for the past 5 years, through rain breakups, house parties, and pandemic grocery hauls, was now locked to me. I stepped back, the world suddenly narrower, and then I heard it. A voice, shrill, self-righteous. "Excuse me, sir, you are not allowed to be here." I turned. Karen Rutherford stood on the sidewalk like a sentry at the edge of an empire. She wore her signature pastel blue sweater set and clutched a clipboard as if it were the Constitution itself. This wasn't our first run-in. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac and president of the Maple Hollow HOA. She patrolled the streets in her golf cart with a smile that never reached her eyes and a mind full of ordinances no one remembered voting on. "I live here," I said slowly. "Not until you settle your violations. You don't," she snapped. "You're trespassing." "I own this house." Karen tapped the clipboard. "Ownership doesn't exempt you from compliance. Section 14C allows the board to revoke access for persistent non-compliance." I felt my jaw clench. "What violations?" "They've been sent to your mailbox," she replied smugly. I checked. Nothing. Not a single letter, not a warning, not even an email. "Let me in, Karen," I said quietly, trying not to raise my voice. "This is my home." Instead of answering, she pulled out her phone and began dialing. 911. "What's your emergency?" I heard the faint voice through the speaker. "I'd like to report a trespasser," she said, eyes locked on mine. "Yes, he's refusing to leave the property. He's being confrontational." My breath caught in my throat. She was calling the cops on me for standing on my own porch. I stepped back, hands slightly raised. "This is my property," I said louder, now hoping the dispatcher could hear me. Karen turned away and walked toward her golf cart, voice growing smaller as she continued to spin the narrative like a spider weaving silk. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers, calm but cautious. I showed them my ID, my property deed, the utilities in my name. One of them asked me how long I'd lived here. I answered 5 years. The other asked if I'd received any legal notice of eviction. None. The older officer shook his head and muttered something about HOAs thinking they're judge and jury. They didn't arrest me. They couldn't. But they advised me not to break the lock. "Sort it out with the HOA," they said. "You don't want to escalate this." I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek to stay quiet. Karen watched from her golf cart, smug and satisfied. I spent that night in my truck. My phone buzzed with texts from friends, some concerned, some confused. I didn't post anything, not yet. I wasn't ready. In the silence, I thought of all the years I'd spent paying dues, keeping my hedges neat, nodding politely when Karen passed by. I remembered the warning she gave me a few months ago when my welcome mat had a profanity on it, humorous, but not family-friendly, she'd said. I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. By midnight, I'd made up my mind. If she wanted to play by the rules, I'd learn them all. If she wanted to invoke power, I'd find out where that power stopped. And if she wanted to call 911 again, I'd make sure the next call came from my attorney. The next morning, I drove straight to the county clerk's office before the doors even opened. I needed paperwork, anything that proved what I already knew: this house was mine. And whatever authority Karen believed she had ended the moment I crossed my property line. Inside, I found myself staring at a microfiche screen, scanning old deeds like a man chasing ghosts. The clerk, a kind woman named April with purple glasses and a voice like melted caramel, helped me pull the official title record. She printed it, stamped it, and slid it across the counter with a nod. "Yours free and clear, Mr. Garner. No liens, no encumbrances, Nothing here says they can lock you out. Is there any record of an easement or shared authority? I asked. April flipped through a few more screens, then shook her head. Not on this parcel. HOA rights are filed under restrictive covenants if they exist, but yours doesn't list one. I thanked her and left with a folder full of proof. Still, something gnawed at me. The way Karen had spoken, so assured, so prepared, told me this wasn't spontaneous. She thought she had legal ground. Or she wanted me to believe she did. Back in my truck, I called the number listed on the HOA notice, still stuck to my front door. It rang 6 times before voicemail kicked in. You've reached Maple Hollow Residential Committee. Office hours are by appointment only. Leave a message. There was no email, no website, no physical address, only a P.O. box, and a disconnected fax line listed on an outdated newsletter I dug out of my glove compartment. The organization supposedly enforcing Section 14C didn't even have a functioning communication channel. I hung up and tried a different approach. My friend Jamal was a real estate agent who'd sold dozens of homes in the area. If anyone knew how these HOAs worked, it was him. He picked up on the second ring. Yo, Alex, what's up? You ever heard of an HOA changing someone's locks without a court order? Jamal whistled low. Not unless it's a multi-unit condo, and the bylaws specifically allow it. And even then, they need documentation. You got anything in writing? Only this orange flyer taped to my door. Karen claims I've been non-compliant with multiple violations. I've seen none of them. Man, he said, his tone darkening. She's playing dirty. And you're not the first. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? There was a guy, Brent Calloway, moved out 2 years ago after a huge dispute with the HOA. Same story. Lock change, citations out of nowhere, threats of fines. What happened? He sold the house and left. Said it wasn't worth the battle. Something inside me flared. I wasn't Brent. After hanging up, I drove straight to the nearest UPS store and rented a mailbox. If Karen was planning to continue this campaign of delayed notices and fake deliveries, she wouldn't be able to claim I was unreachable anymore. I wanted a paper trail. I also wanted legal backup. That afternoon, I paid a visit to Claire Lynn, a civil attorney, recommended by a colleague. Her office was tucked inside a renovated craftsman house near downtown, full of plants, books, and a scent of citrus. Calm, focused, deliberate, that was Claire. She reviewed my documents in silence, her pen tapping the edge of her desk. When she reached the orange notice, her eyes narrowed. This isn't worth the paper it's printed on, she said flatly. No authority seal, no citation code, no actual statute. She keeps referencing Section 14C of the HOA Charter, I said. Claire opened her laptop, found the Maple Hollow HOA bylaws online, albeit on a site last updated in 2017, and scanned them quickly. There is a Section 14. Subsection C deals with landscaping standards and temporary fencing for renovation. It doesn't mention lockouts, not even close. I felt a bitter laugh crawl up my throat. She's bluffing. No, Claire said, she's overreaching, which is more dangerous. She leaned forward. You need to formally request all records of violations, minutes from board meetings that discussed your property, and any official votes on enforcement action. Send it in writing, certified mail. And if they ignore it, we file a petition for injunctive relief. And if she's made up the rules, we hit her with fraud, unlawful entry, and possible abuse of authority. I exhaled slowly. It was more than I'd expected, but less than I feared. At least now I had a roadmap. That night, I camped in my truck again. I watched from across the street as Karen rolled past my home in her golf cart like a royal guard inspecting enemy territory. She didn't see me in the shadows. I didn't wave. Instead, I opened my laptop, created a new file labeled HOA Timeline, and began documenting everything from the first lock change to the 911 call, to the visit with the clerk, screenshots, photos, dates, witness names. I knew this was bigger than a petty feud. This was about the right to live in your own home, without fear of some self-appointed authority figure rewriting the rules as she went. And I wasn't going to roll over. The next morning, I printed Claire's demand letter and walked it right to the HOA's P.O. box. I slid it in myself. The war had begun. I thought the silence that followed would be a good sign that maybe, just maybe, Karen had realized she'd overstepped, and the letter from my attorney had been enough to make her pause. But silence in war is never peace. It's preparation. 3 days after I dropped the certified letter into the HOA's P.O. box, I returned to my truck after grabbing lunch and found an envelope under the wiper blade. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a printed packet, 31 pages of violations, each one more absurd than the last. Some were laughable. Grass blades exceeding HOA mandated 2.5 inches. Inappropriate seasonal decor displayed after designated removal date. Garage door paint faded beyond 3% tone tolerance. Others were personal. Failure to maintain a community-friendly aesthetic. Interpersonal hostility toward HOA board members. Unauthorized use of property for non-compliant gatherings. At the bottom, a total fine balance of $4.60.75. Due immediately. Stapled to the back was a document titled Notice of Continued Trespass, referencing again Section 14C, now underlined and highlighted in yellow. I stared at it in my front seat for a long moment, then did what anyone with a working pulse and a rising sense of righteous fury would do. I posted it. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. I scanned every page, redacted personal addresses, and captioned it with, "My HOA just dropped 31 violations on me. I've lived here 5 years. This is their idea of governance." Within hours, the post was exploding. Lawyers stitched it. Former HOA victims chimed in. One tweet read, "Decor violations. That's a new level of insanity. This isn't a homeowners association. It's a suburban dictatorship." By nightfall, the hashtag HOA fraud was trending. But with every comment came a question I couldn't ignore. How long had this been going on, and how many others had been steamrolled into silence? I started knocking on doors. At first, people were hesitant. Nobody wanted to be quoted. But when I told them what happened to me, and that I had a lawyer, they started talking. A pattern emerged. Elaine, a widow 2 doors down, had been fined a $150 because her son parked in her driveway facing the wrong direction during a Sunday visit. She paid the fine and never spoke of it again. Carlos, a contractor, had his permit flagged as invalid when he tried to build a small pergola in his backyard, because Karen personally disapproved of the structure's alignment. Tom, a Vietnam vet with a service dog, received daily citations until he moved out, one of which was for unlicensed lawn ornaments. His American flag. They all had stories, and they all ended the same way. Intimidation, paper fines, threats of liens, or the final submission moving out. Claire and I gathered the testimonies. Some neighbors were still scared. Karen has friends on the board, one whispered. If you go after her, they'll come for you. But fear only works when it's isolated. When you put stories side by side, you get a pattern. And patterns are provable. We discovered that Karen had updated the HOA charter 3 times in the last 2 years, but never sent copies to the residents. The so-called Section 14C didn't exist until 9 months ago, buried in a PDF. Nobody knew how to access, written in vague, legally questionable language. Claire said it's junk law made to intimidate, not to enforce. But then we found the real bombshell. Through a records request with the county, we uncovered that Karen had filed to register the HOA as a private property oversight organization, a classification that gave her expanded rights, but only if every resident signed off. They hadn't. In fact, only 3 signatures appeared on the document, hers, her vice president, who turned out to be her cousin, and a secretary no one in the neighborhood had ever met. Forgery, fraud, false governance. Claire's face was unreadable when she found it. This is criminal, Alex. You're not just fighting a corrupt HOA, you're fighting a con. I sat with that sentence like a weight. All I wanted was to water my lawn, grill on weekends, and paint my door the exact damn color I liked without being surveilled like a felon. Now I was staring down an empire built on fine print and fear. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did something simple. I walked back to my front door, peeled the orange violation notice off the window, and replaced it with something new. A laminated sign, printed in black on white. This property is privately owned. All legal matters regarding access or occupancy must be handled through certified court order. Unauthorized entry is a criminal offense. I added Claire's contact at the bottom. Let her call 911 again. Let her try. The next morning, I sat in a lawn chair just beyond my locked gate, sipping coffee, watching Karen circle in her golf cart like a vulture eyeing a stubborn meal. She slowed when she saw the sign. For the first time in weeks, she didn't smile. She just drove on. I didn't move, because I knew now. The paper trail she'd built wasn't just fragile, it was flammable, and I was holding the match. It was a Saturday, warm, breezy, with that golden kind of sunlight that made the whole street glow like a commercial for family cookouts and American dreams. I'd spent the morning at the farmer's market and came home with ribs, corn, and a cold 6-pack. I figured I'd invite a couple of friends over, throw some stuff on the grill, and pretend my life wasn't an HOA-induced legal thriller, additive for grammatical correctness. Around 4 in the afternoon, the grill was sizzling music, playing low from a Bluetooth speaker, and the scent of barbecue floated through the air like a flag of freedom. For a few short hours, everything felt normal again. Then I heard it. "You're violating noise ordinances." Karen stood on the edge of my lawn, arms folded, lips pursed so tight they could have been stapled shut. I wasn't playing anything louder than a ball game on a Sunday, and it was 4 o'clock, not midnight. But logic had long since abandoned this war. I raised a hand in mock greeting. "Afternoon, Karen." "This is non-compliant behavior, Mr. Garner," she snapped. "Unregistered gathering. Outdoor grill smoke exceeding safe particulate thresholds." I laughed out loud. "Karen, it's meat on a grill in America." "You were warned," she said, pulling out her phone. I watched as her thumb hovered, then pressed 911. I stepped forward, camera already recording. "You're calling the cops on me for grilling on my own lawn." She didn't respond. Instead, she began describing me again to the dispatcher. "Says he's the owner, but he's been officially documented as non-compliant, aggressive. He's hosting a gathering in violation of HOA safety standards, possibly trespassing again." I froze. My phone still rolled, picking up every word. And then a second voice broke in. "Is she serious right now?" I turned. My cousin Derek, off-duty police officer still wearing his gym clothes, stood behind me with a beer in hand and a look of disbelief spreading across his face. He stepped into view of my phone. "Hey, dispatch, this is Officer Derek Myers, badge 4407. I'm present at the scene off-duty but observing. No threats, no trespassing. The individual in question is on his own property, hosting a peaceful cookout." Karen's face turned a shade of red not found in nature. "Are you trying to interfere with a law enforcement call?" she hissed. "I am law enforcement," Derek said, flashing his ID. "And what you're doing is borderline misuse of emergency services." I uploaded the video 10 minutes later. No music, no edits, just raw truth. Caption: "She called 911 on my barbecue, on my lawn, again." This time she got a surprise. #HOA drama. Number 911 misuse, #grillgate. By midnight, it had over 3.8 million views. People stitched it, parodied it. Lawyers broke down the abuse of process. EMTs and dispatchers commented about how dangerous it was to flood emergency lines with HOA nonsense. But what really made it explode was what happened the next day. Derek called me around noon. "You might want to check your DMs." I opened Instagram and saw it. A message request from a verified account, HOA Freedom Watch. It read, "We've been tracking reports of abuse by private neighborhood associations across the state. Your video triggered 3 separate complaints in our database. We'd like to speak with you, confidentially." Within hours, I was on a call with Trent Massey, an investigator with the State Attorney General's Office Division of Civic Oversight. "This isn't just about your HOA, Mr. Garner," he said. "It's happening in clusters, same tactics, same language, same phantom citations, and 911 overuse. We believe some of these HOA presidents are exchanging strategies through informal groups, Telegram chats, closed Facebook groups. Your video opened a door." My pulse kicked up. I'm just a guy who wanted to eat ribs in peace. Trent chuckled. "And now you might be our best witness." We agreed to a meeting. I'd share documentation. He'd keep me informed. But more than that, he gave me something I hadn't had in weeks: validation. That night, I got another message, this time from a former Maple Hollow resident who'd moved away a year ago. Brent Calloway. His message was short. "I saw your video. I used to live in your house. She did the same thing to me. I've still got the paperwork." I called him immediately. Brent told me his story, how Karen had started small. Warnings for overgrown lavender. Complaints about the color of his driveway. Then came the lockout, the fines, the threats. "I fought for a while," he said. "But I didn't have a lawyer. And I was scared. I'd just gotten out of a rough divorce and didn't have energy for another war, so I left." "You kept the paperwork, everything. Emails, voicemails, even a recording of one of the board meetings." He sent it to me that night. In the audio, Karen's voice was unmistakable. "They won't fight. They never do. Just stack the violations, make it look official, and they'll walk." My hand tightened around the phone. I forwarded the file to Claire and to Trent. This wasn't a pattern anymore. This was a strategy. By midnight, my inbox was overflowing with stories. People from neighboring communities, friends of friends, anonymous HOA employees using burner emails, all telling the same tale. Karen wasn't the only one. And she wasn't just a tyrant. She was part of something bigger. The next day, I filed an official misuse of emergency services complaint against her. And with Claire's help, we drafted a civil demand for restoration of property, access, and removal of unauthorized fines, the first step in a broader legal counterattack. But while I was making calls and collecting records, Karen was preparing her next move. That evening, I found another notice posted to my gate. This one was red. It read, "Final notice of violation. Continued defiance will result in legal forfeiture of property under HOA Charter Authority. Immediate compliance required." No signature, no legal seal, no reference number, just a bluff in bold. I took a photo. Then I took it down. Then I took a deep breath. I wasn't backing down. Not when I was this close. Not when I just exposed her mask. Not when I could see the cracks forming in the paper-thin walls she'd built around our community. She thought calling the cops on me would scare me. All it did was give me the evidence I needed. If you had told me a month earlier that I'd become the reluctant figurehead of a neighborhood resistance, I'd have laughed and pointed at the grill. But now here I was, turning my living room into a war room floor littered with printouts, USB drives, maps, and sticky notes, while a whiteboard leaned against the window with one question in red marker at the top: who profits from this? Because that was the question nobody else had been brave enough to ask. Not until Brent's recordings. Not until Karen's 911 call turned my cookout into a viral investigation. Not until the neighbors, once quiet in fear, started slipping me notes in my mailbox and stopping me at the curb with hushed voices and tearful stories. What started as harassment was beginning to look a lot more like extortion. I was halfway through cataloging HOA fine letters from various residents when I got a knock at the door. It was Diane Ramos, the soft-spoken nurse from 3 houses down, holding a manila envelope in one hand and a trembling cup of coffee in the other. "I don't want trouble," she said, but I couldn't keep it to myself. She handed me the envelope. Inside copies of bank statements from the HOA's public account, stapled next to invoices from a company I'd never heard of, Civic Maintenance and Oversight Group, LLC. The same company name appeared 5 times in just a 2-month span, each time billed for vague services. Compliance Review Consulting, $3,200. Grounds Aesthetic Audit, $4,100. Administrative Efficiency Optimization, $2,850. All invoices paid in full, each one signed not by a treasurer, but by Karen Rutherford. I stared at the LLC name again, then opened my laptop. 20 minutes of digging later, I had the truth. Karen was the sole registered owner of the company. She was contracting services from herself and paying herself using HOA dues. This wasn't just a petty tyrant on a clipboard. This was embezzlement. I called Claire. She didn't even say hello. "I've been waiting for your call," she said. "I have something too." She'd just received a signed affidavit from a former HOA board member, George Wallace, who had resigned 6 months earlier under what he'd called personal pressure. Turns out Karen had threatened him with a lawsuit over a confidentiality breach when he asked to see actual voting records from their most recent charter update. George had saved everything: meeting notes, emails, even a copy of a pre-approved violation list that Karen had allegedly used as a template to cite specific homes in advance of any actual inspection. She was planning it, George wrote, creating paper trails before anyone ever committed an infraction. We now had witnesses, paper evidence, a growing list of financial inconsistencies, a confirmed shell company funneling community funds into private pockets. And then came the knock on my back door. It was Michael Goss, a quiet retired city planner who lived at the edge of the cul-de-sac. He rarely came to meetings. People said he traveled a lot, kept to himself. I'd only spoken to him once when my garbage can accidentally tipped into his driveway. He looked around nervously, then stepped inside, holding a cardboard tube. "I heard what you're doing," he said, "and I want to help." He unrolled the tube on my table. Inside was a detailed zoning map of the neighborhood from 10 years ago before the HOA expansion. Michael tapped a section shaded in light green. "See that's city-owned, green space. Karen fenced it off last year, said it was HOA maintained, started charging extra for its upkeep, but it was never transferred to HOA authority." He pointed again. "And this section here, that's a public utility easement. She told the Jeffersons they had to remove their tool shed because it violated a visual corridor rule. That's bogus. She has no jurisdiction there." We went over parcel after parcel. It was a map of overreach. Karen had slowly redrawn the neighborhood, Not with ink, but with fear. She had enforced policies on land she didn't control, fined people under rules she invented, and created a fortress of silence, backed by confusing language and phony legal threats. Michael rolled up the map and handed it to me. People like her don't expect resistance. They expect compliance. Bureaucracy is her weapon. But precision, that's ours. That same night, I received a call from Trent Massey, the investigator from the state attorney's office. "We're officially escalating this," he said. "You've got enough evidence to suggest criminal intent. We're issuing a subpoena for the HOA's financials. I need you to keep collecting." The storm was coming, but Karen wasn't going down without a fight. The next day, 6 more houses, including mine, received final community warnings. No envelope, just papers taped to doors like eviction notices. All were identical except for one line: "Failure to cease coordinated defamation campaigns will result in escalated disciplinary action and formal legal response." No signature, no legal seal, no address for appeal. Karen had gone from clipboard citations to intimidation leaflets, but her tactics had stopped working. Neighbors began talking to each other out loud without fear. They met in driveways, shared printouts, created group chats. The hush of compliance was replaced with whispers of rebellion. We were no longer isolated, and in the eyes of the law, we were becoming something powerful, a class. Claire and I began preparing the documents for a class action lawsuit. Over 20 households agreed to sign on within 48 hours. We outlined every violation, every incident, every financial discrepancy, and packaged it with dates, emails, and declarations. But we still needed one last thing: the smoking gun. The one thing that would remove any doubt that this wasn't just mismanagement or incompetence, but intentional, premeditated abuse of authority for personal gain. We didn't have to wait long. It came in the form of a flash drive, a knock at the door after sunset. A woman in her 40s, eyes cautious, holding a hoodie close around her face. "I don't have much time," she whispered. "They can't know I was here." She placed the flash drive in my hand and left before I could ask her name. When I plugged it in, there were dozens of files, audio recordings, screenshots of internal board messages, scanned handouts labeled Karen's Playbook, and a folder simply titled Control. The first file was an audio clip. Karen's voice, unmistakable, said, "They won't fight. They never fight. Once the fines pile up, they fold. They always fold. It's not about being legal. It's about being loud, fast, scary. Make them afraid to ask questions, and you never have to answer them." The second recording was worse. "We should find a reason to cite Alex. Trash cans, fence line, music, anything. He's stirring people up. He thinks just because he owns his land, he's safe." My hand tightened around the phone. I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't petty HOA nonsense. This was a coordinated campaign of coercion. And now we had her voice. We had her map. We had her paper trail. And soon we'd have her in court. The notice arrived on a Tuesday, tucked under windshield wipers, taped to mailboxes, wedged into porch railings like a paper storm nobody had asked for. Emergency HOA assembly, mandatory attendance required. Location Maple Hollow Clubhouse. Time 6:00 p.m. Wednesday. Agenda community defamation and compliance crisis. That last phrase, compliance crisis, made me laugh. But the rest made my stomach turn. It was a trap. Karen was making her move. Claire warned me. She's going to try to regain control with spectacle. Fear, public shaming, misdirection. Be ready. I wasn't just ready. I was armed with truth, with proof, and with 35 neighbors who'd stopped being silent. The day of the meeting, I wore jeans and a button-down. Nothing flashy, just grounded, present, determined. I arrived 10 minutes early, but the lot was already packed. People were filing into the Maple Hollow Clubhouse like it was a town hall, hearing some cautious, others angry, but all curious. Inside, the lights were too bright, the chairs arranged in tight rows, and the air cold enough to keep tempers just below a boil. At the front stood a long folding table dressed up like a courtroom bench, white tablecloth, clipboards, and placards. Karen sat in the center like a judge in an HOA kangaroo court. Added in for grammatical correctness. She wore a forest green blazer and a gold brooch, her hair pinned up tightly as if she were testifying before the Senate. To her left, 2 board members I barely recognized. To her right, an empty chair. No secretary tonight. She tapped the microphone, yes, an actual PA mic, and cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming. I know emotions have been high lately, and misinformation has been spreading through unofficial channels. Tonight, we will address these concerns and reinforce the standards that protect our neighborhood. Several people around me shifted in their chairs. Karen clicked a remote, and a projector screen flickered to life behind her. What followed was the HOA equivalent of a propaganda reel. Photos of supposed violations, a lawn chair, askew a faded mailbox, my own BBQ from last week, were displayed in grayscale, each one labeled with large red letters, non-compliant. She showed graphs with downward arrows, implying property value depreciation. This is what defiance looks like, she said, turning to the crowd. This is what damages community harmony. And this man, she clicked again, revealing a zoomed-in photo of me standing in my driveway, has actively worked to dismantle the very structure that keeps Maple Hollow thriving. Gasps rippled through the audience, but not for the reason Karen expected. Mr. Garner? She continued, her voice taking on the cadence of an orator has called into question every action taken by this board. He has shared incomplete documents, weaponized social media, and incited others to defy the very standards they agreed to when purchasing their homes. I stood slowly. My heart was pounding, but my spine was steel. May I respond? Karen raised her chin. This is not an open floor. Someone in the back shouted, why not? Another voice chimed in. Yeah, let him speak. Karen's grip on the remote tightened. This is an official HOA presentation. Questions may be submitted in writing. Claire entered the room calm as a storm cloud. Actually, she said, this is a meeting of homeowners on private property. You don't get to silence their voices under the guise of procedure, especially not when we've submitted a formal complaint regarding fraudulent governance. Karen's face drained. Claire pulled out a folder and handed it to the two board members flanking her. These are audio recordings, tax documents, contractor invoices, and internal emails, all signed, dated, and validated. They show Ms. Rutherford directing HOA funds into a company she owns, issuing fabricated fines, and instructing members to create paper trails of false violations. Karen stood. This is slander. No, I said, stepping forward with my own folder. This is a record. I clicked my own presentation on the secondary projector Claire had brought, prepared just in case. The screen flashed with Maple Hollow, HOA, a pattern of power, profit, and abuse. Slide by slide, I laid it bare. The fake 911 calls, the red line documents, the altered charter, the shell company, the 37 violations I received in one envelope. And then came the audio. Karen's voice clipped and cruel. They won't fight. They never fight. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Someone muttered, my God. Claire moved in for the final blow. We have filed for a temporary restraining order against the current HOA leadership. Additionally, we are in communication with the State Attorney General's office regarding criminal charges. Tonight, we invite the community to call a vote when allowed under Section 10B of the original bylaws on the immediate suspension of Karen Rutherford and the dissolution of the current board pending legal review. Karen's chair scraped loudly as she pushed back. You can't do this. I am this board. No, Claire said, her voice calm but thunderous. You were. Now we'll let the people decide. Hands raised. Voices followed. A formal vote was called right there in the clubhouse. And for the first time in the HOA's history, it wasn't conducted behind closed doors or mailed to a hidden P.O. box. It was counted out loud in full view of everyone present. 42-3. Karen grabbed her purse and stormed out without another word. No gavel, no speech, no grace. Only silence. And the sound of a door, her door closing for the last time. People erupted in applause. Neighbors hugged. Some cried. Claire looked at me and smiled. You didn't just stand your ground, Alex. You made it safe for everyone else to stand with you. Outside the clubhouse, under the dusky sky, I looked at the crowd, no longer afraid, no longer silent, and realized something simple, profound, and powerful. This wasn't just a story about HOA abuse. This was the moment a neighborhood reclaimed its name. The morning after the vote, the sun rose quiet and clean. There was no siren, no barking dog, no ridiculous notices duct taped to anyone's front door. Just birdsong and coffee. And the crisp kind of silence that means something new is beginning. I stood on my porch with my usual mug, letting the light settle on my shoulders, and watched as neighbors I once barely knew waved at me like old friends. There were nods, thumbs ups, even a couple of thank you cards tucked into my mailbox. Additive for grammatical correctness. But the fight wasn't over. Claire and I still had mountains to climb. Legal reviews, civil claims audits, media inquiries. The class action lawsuit had officially been filed by noon that Thursday, And within days, so had the first of several criminal investigations into Karen Rutherford and her network of enablers. It turned out Civic Maintenance and Oversight Group LLC had been used in 3 different neighborhoods in our county alone. In each one, Karen had either served as board president consultant or had close ties to someone who did. One of her former HOA associates, a man named Ray Coates, was already under investigation for embezzlement in a neighboring development. The system was cracking, and light was pouring through. But it wasn't just about the bad guys falling. It was about what came next. 2 weeks after the vote, we held our first community meeting under interim leadership. No microphones, no folding tables, just a potluck in the park. Kids running through sprinklers. Adults sitting on lawn chairs, a whiteboard with ideas scribbled in Sharpie, transparent accounting, real maintenance schedules, voluntary committees, mental health resources for seniors, a shared garden space, a community lending library box. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. Claire, elected as interim treasurer by unanimous vote, leaned toward me during the meeting and whispered, "Can you believe this all started with barbecue?" I chuckled, and one very loud Karen. We shared a look, half relief, half disbelief. Then my phone buzzed. A notification, the HOA 911 barbecue video, had just passed 12 million views. More importantly, Front Porch Rights, the homeowner advocacy nonprofit I'd begun quietly working with, had asked if I'd consider speaking at a statewide town hall. "They want you to tell your story," Trent texted. "But more than that, they want you to help shape policy." That night, I stayed up late, long after the neighborhood had gone still. I sat in my backyard, phone off, stars above a single candle burning next to a notepad. And I thought, how many people are living in silence right now? How many have been bullied by paper laws and fake fines? How many are told to just comply while power-hungry people build private kingdoms behind HOA titles? And what if one voice could start the unmasking? In the weeks that followed, we didn't just rebuild policy. We rebuilt trust. Michael, the retired city planner, led the zoning clarification committee. Diane, the nurse, started a community care group that helped elderly neighbors with grocery runs and wellness checks. Even the Jeffersons, once nearly forced to demolish their shed, donated a bench and a plaque to the park, to the people who said no more. But the moment that truly floored me happened one Sunday afternoon. I was walking past the clubhouse, now stripped of Karen's ugly gray drapes and authorized entry-only signs, when a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered something. The mother turned, smiled, and said, "Excuse me, are you the guy who made it safe to ride bikes here again?" I blinked. I guess I am. The girl grinned, then pedaled off across the sidewalk I'd once been fined for using improperly. The mother mouthed, "Thank you." And in that instant, I understood. This wasn't about winning. This was about reclaiming space, about making the ground under your feet truly yours again. Because sometimes trespassing isn't about property lines. It's about daring to exist freely, visibly, in a place someone told you didn't belong to you. But it did. It always did. A month had passed since Karen's fall from power, and while the neighborhood pulsed with a new kind of energy, kids on sidewalks, porch lights left on like beacons of normalcy, the legal tide was still rising behind the scenes. One evening, while sorting through more documents for the lawsuit, I received an encrypted email. The sender was listed only as L. Green. The subject line read, "She didn't act alone. It's time you knew everything." The message was brief but chilling. I was Karen's personal assistant during the 2022-2024 term. She didn't delete everything like she said. I have backups, files, audio, internal board messages she never meant to see daylight. If you're serious about real reform, meet me. Attached was an address to a storage facility 2 towns over and a note, Unit 3B. Saturday, noon. Come alone. Claire was wary, of course. She insisted on driving me and waiting in the car with a recording app running just in case. I arrived at the location, a dim row of beige roll-up doors, exactly on time. Unit 3B was already unlocked. Inside, standing next to a stack of labeled banker's boxes, was a woman in her early 30s. Her posture was guarded, but her eyes were resolute. "I'm Lauren Green," she said. I kept my mouth shut for too long. She handed me a single folder. "Start with that. Then take the rest if you still want the truth." Inside was a typed memo from Karen, dated just after she took office as HOA president. Agenda for fiscal quarter 1. Increase monthly violations for non-compliance, target 5 to 35 month. Identify anchor violators for public examples, rotate every 2 months. Funnel fines into consultant pool reimbursements via Civic MOG LLC. Avoid written confirmation on charter changes unless compelled. Silence dissent early. Shame works better than rules. Keep Alex Garner under watch. He's too fact-based. I looked up at Lauren. This is strategy, not policy. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Karen treated the HOA like a personal business. Every decision was about leverage, psychological or financial. When members pushed back, she'd dig for property line discrepancies or unused permits. If she couldn't find anything, she'd manufacture it. Over the next hour, she walked me through an arsenal of data. Recordings of Karen coaching board members on how to speak with legal authority without legal basis. PDF files of violation projection charts used to forecast fine income. Spreadsheets showing that over 38% of HOA funds had been rerouted into Civic MOG LLC in the past year alone. And worst of all, an email from a local security contractor agreeing to patrol troublesome residents' properties at night for a fee labeled Behavioral Containment Oversight. That included you, Lauren added. I'm sorry. I tried to leave last year, but Karen threatened me with a defamation lawsuit. Said I'd signed a confidentiality clause. I hadn't. I told her what she already knew deep down. You're the reason we can prove this wasn't just abuse. It was enterprise fraud. She sighed. Then take it all. I don't want it anymore. But make it count. And we did. Over the next week, Claire and I compiled everything cross-referenced, Karen's memo to self with real HOA records, matched timestamps, logged GPS data from patrol reports. Claire brought in a forensic accountant from her law school days who confirmed the money trail. It was airtight. We submitted the full dossier to the state prosecutor's office. What followed moved faster than any of us had predicted. A grand jury subpoena was issued within 72 hours. The local news picked up the story, titling it HOA Power Trip from Barbecue Fines to Felony Fraud. A retired judge offered to serve as an independent mediator for Maple Hollow's interim board reformation. And yes, Karen was arrested. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning. No cuffs in the driveway drama. Just quiet footsteps, a knock on her door, and a booking photo that later made the rounds on national news sites under the headline, From President to Defendant. But even that wasn't the final blow. 3 days later, the county clerk's office issued a public notice. The Civic Maintenance and Oversight Group LLC has been formally dissolved under fraud allegations. All affiliated contracts are frozen pending investigation. In short, the empire collapsed. We threw a potluck that Saturday. I grilled again, this time without Karen peering from behind the fence or a patrol SUV circling the block. Families brought food. Neighbors shared old photos. A retired music teacher even brought his saxophone and played soft jazz under the pavilion. Lauren showed up too. She sat beside me and watched the kids run laps around the basketball court. I didn't think I'd ever be welcome again, she said. You helped end something ugly, I told her. That always deserves a seat at the table. She smiled. You know what this reminds me of? What? A neighborhood. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by people who had once been afraid to speak, it struck me again. We didn't just remove a tyrant. We reclaimed a truth. That home is more than walls and property lines. It's a shared space, a living promise. And sometimes it takes a war of paper and principle to protect it. I never set out to become a symbol, but somehow I did. Within a month of Karen's arrest and the exposure of Civic MOG, the ripple effect went far beyond Maple Hollow. Stories began surfacing from across the country. HOA abuses that had once been whispered behind hedges were now shouted from rooftops, sometimes literally. One man in Arizona shared how his HOA banned the color of his solar panels. A family in Florida was fined for hosting a lemonade stand, and a retired nurse in Nevada was nearly evicted for painting her mailbox a shade too warm. Each message echoed the same thing: we thought we were alone. But they weren't, and now they knew it. Front Porch Rights reached out again. This time they wanted me to join a panel at the National Homeowners Reform Summit in Washington, D.C. It sounded surreal. Me, a guy who just wanted to grill in peace. But Claire insisted, you're not just a homeowner anymore. You're a precedent. I flew out on a chilly morning in October. The summit was held in a grand old hall near the Capitol. Marble floors, brass fixtures, and nameplates that made me feel like I'd wandered into a courtroom by accident. The panel included lawyers, sociologists, former HOA board members, and me, the homeowner who said no. That was literally how they introduced me. I shared our story from the beginning: the lock on the gate, The 911 call, the boardroom takedown, the whistleblower, the barbecue that became a revolution. People listened. Some took notes, others cried. But the most powerful moment came when a woman in the audience stood up during the Q&A. She was elderly, wearing a cardigan with a hummingbird pin, and her voice shook. My HOA tried to evict me because I planted a rose bush for my late husband. I was told it wasn't part of the approved landscaping plan. I fought for 2 years. I lost. Her hands trembled. But after hearing you, maybe I didn't really lose. I stepped down from the stage and hugged her. And that moment, caught on 5 different cameras, went viral within hours. By the next morning, my inbox was a flood of invitations. Podcasts, local government hearings, even a spot on a morning news show under the segment title, When HOAs Go Too Far. But I didn't want fame. I wanted infrastructure. So we built it. Claire and I, along with a dozen other HOA survivors and reformers, formed a nonprofit called Right to Home. Its mission provide free legal templates, advocacy resources, and media support for homeowners battling abusive HOAs. Within 6 weeks, over 22,000 people had downloaded our starter toolkit. More than 30 neighborhoods had voted to dissolve or restructure their HOAs. 2 counties had proposed local ordinances limiting HOA enforcement powers without judicial review. And at home, Maple Hollow blossomed. We voted in a permanent board with real transparency. Budgets were posted online. Meetings were open air and streamed for those who couldn't attend. We planted a community garden. We created a swap shed for tools and toys. We even held an annual Karen-free barbecue, which, yes, became a meme. Kids laughed louder. Lawns looked like expressions, not battlegrounds. And for the first time in years, no one was fined for forgetting to bring in a trash bin. Still, I kept the padlock Karen had used on my front gate. I mounted it on a small wooden plaque in my garage. Below it, I carved the words, "She locked me out of my own home." So I opened the door for everyone else. Because that's what it was really about in the end. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't spectacle, it wasn't even justice in the traditional sense. It was reclamation of land, of dignity, of voice. And in a world where silence is often enforced by paperwork and fear, the act of standing tall, of saying, "No more," is nothing short of revolutionary. A year after it all began, after the call to 911, the clubhouse vote, the whistleblower revelations, the summit in DC, life had found a new rhythm. Not the quiet I once imagined when I moved to Maple Hollow, but something better. Something earned. I stood again on the back deck of my house, the same spot where this whole journey started. The lake shimmered like it always had, but now the stillness didn't feel like an escape. It felt like ownership. Not of the land, though I owned that too, but of the space, of the air, of the right to breathe without surveillance, to mow my lawn without fear, to build, paint, sit or stand without a paper notice telling me I was somehow wrong for existing. A warm breeze blew in from the north. The scent of lilac and grilled vegetables carried across the yards. Our new neighborhood tradition, Freedom Fridays, had begun just a few weeks earlier. Each week, someone hosted a casual dinner in their yard, no RSVP needed. Tonight, it was my turn. As the sun dipped low, people began to arrive. Claire showed up first, a tray of lemon bars in one hand, and a stack of nonprofit mail in the other. "You got another letter from the Attorney General," she said, handing it over. I opened it later that night. Inside, the state of redacted has formally adopted the Homeowner Fair Practice Act, inspired in part by your case. Thank you for your testimony and your courage. I stared at the words, trying to absorb them. A law. A real one. Something that might prevent another family from going through what we had. Neighbors filed into the backyard, carrying dishes, drinks, folding chairs. The air buzzed not with tension, but with belonging. Laughter replaced whispers. Kids chased fireflies along the edge of the fence. Yes, that fence, the one that had once been a battleground. Now repainted, reclaimed. A little boy named Elijah tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Garner, is it true you made the lady with the gold pin go away?" I knelt to his level. "No, Elijah. She made herself go away. I just reminded everyone we had the right to say no." He nodded, solemn as a judge, then ran off to play tag. Later that evening, as twilight settled and the fire pit crackled, I took a moment to step aside. I looked over the gathering, old friends, new neighbors, people who once thought they'd lost control of their own homes, now laughing, debating sauce recipes, comparing tomato starts. This wasn't just a barbecue. This was a neighborhood reborn. Claire joined me at the edge of the deck. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I'd take this noise, this joy, any day." She smiled. "You ever think about writing a book?" I laughed. "What would I call it? Barbecuing with bureaucrats?" She shook her head. "No. You'd call it what it is: the day the HOA called 911 on the wrong man." And that's when it hit me. The story was over, but the movement had only begun. Across the country, more neighborhoods were taking back control. More homeowners were learning to read bylaws, attend meetings, demand transparency. What once felt like an unstoppable machine of petty fines and passive-aggressive notices was starting to crack under the weight of awareness. And it all began right here, with one man, one grill, one ridiculous phone call. I walked back to the fire-refilled drinks, passed out plates. I smiled at each face, knowing that every one of them had played a part. This wasn't a community I found. It was one we built together. No threats, no fines, just freedom. And finally, home.